Before we get going, I have a sound you absolutely need to hear. That's the good stuff. Alright friends, so this week we are going to be talking about character depth and role-playing games, specifically D&D, but all role-playing games are absolutely part of this conversation. So anybody who's known me for longer than like an hour knows that I'm a D&D nerd or a tabletop role-playing game nerd. I have a giant D20 tattoo on my right forearm. If you check the show notes on Substack, you will find it there. If you aren't on Substack, well, it is a green D20, and beneath it are the words Carpe DM. Not DM as in the day, as in DM as in Dungeon Master. Yep, I am that nerd. I am currently in 3 games at the moment, which meet weekly as adults. And again, if you know anything about tabletop role-playing games, you know that that means dedication. I'm currently saving up for the next part of my tattoo because I'm going to be getting a half sleeve on my right arm of Dungeons and Dragons stuff, and I am going for the Holy Avenger specifically. That is the sword used by paladin characters, and I most often play paladins pretty much to the exclusion of every other class. So what does this have to do with writing, right? Because this podcast is about writing, so what does it have to do about writing? Well, one of the things about TTRPGs is that when you're playing a character, you usually get really deeply into their head because you're portraying their actions at the table. Some games aren't as in-depth as others, but the ones that I play are run by people who really are into narrative structure and telling stories, and I also, when I'm running, often use the same kind of method. We're more about the narrative than we are about the strategic combat, though that is an element of the game. The people I play with, we do voices, we sometimes have props, there's relationships between the characters that are very deep and robust. It's a really phenomenal experience, and I love being at the table. One of the games that I'm currently in is we are playing through Curse of Strahd. If you have not played any Dungeons and Dragons and don't know what Curse of Strahd is, it is a very famous Dungeons and Dragons story, and I'm playing through that with a group of friends. To nobody's shock or surprise, I am playing a paladin. And I usually default to paladins, but every single character is different, and their stories end up playing out differently, which we'll get into later. The paladin I'm playing right now is Sir Ketheric. He is a half-orcish man and has a severe learning disability. I want to be clear here that I'm not playing him as stupid. He isn't unintelligent, but he has negatives to things with book learning, and that is reflected in the fact that his intelligence stat is at a -1. He is an 8. And that means that whenever I roll intelligence, I have to actually take away. But that's not because he's stupid, it's because he has no book learning skills, because he's severely dyslexic. And as a person who is dyslexic, who is disabled, I am not trying to be ableist, and in his portrayal, in fact, quite the opposite. He's a commanding, wonderful character. He just struggles with book learning because he has learning disabilities. Sir Ketheric was orphaned at a very young age. He was left on the steps of a church to the deity Lathander, and Lathander represents goodness, light, justice, redemption, a whole bunch of other things in that setting. He's a good deity. There are a lot of deities in D&D, and a lot of them aren't very good, but he was left outside the church of a good deity. And honestly, he believes his parents did the best they could by leaving him outside a place like that, and he doesn't have much trauma around the fact that he's an orphan. In fact, he had a really good upbringing. He was raised well, he was really given the opportunity to shine as a soldier, and now he serves as a paladin in the Order of the Rising Sun. That means he can also cast spells that drive back darkness and evil, sometimes heal people, and is a fierce enemy of nasty, dark creatures. In Curse of Strahd, there are a lot of undead and awful things that really need smiting, and that's one of the reasons I chose to play a paladin. We had somebody else already playing a cleric, so I defaulted to my usual. In addition to that, Sir Ketheric is an Oath of Redemption paladin, which means that he's constantly trying to pull people away from dark paths and trying to see the good in others. That leads him to sometimes being too trusting, which again is a reflection of his low intelligence stat. He is kind of not really paying attention to the way that people sometimes try and manipulate him. He's not stupid, but he does tend to trust others more than he ought to. If this sounds like just a ramble about my D&D characters, it isn't. There's a point to this, but I need to explain some stuff before we get there. So when I first started playing Ketherick, his entire story was he was an orphan but happy about it, entered Barovia, which is the country this story takes place in, as a happy young man doing his best to take care of others and serve the church by driving away dark forces. Dark forces here meaning genuinely evil creatures. We're not talking like racist nonsense, but we're talking like creatures that kill, hurt, maim, feed on other things in a way that is seriously detrimental to the townsfolk, so we're talking genuine evil. We have hit about the 1/3 way mark of this campaign. We just hit level 5 last session, which was amazing, and Ketherick has been developing a great deal through the course of this story. We've been playing in this game for quite a few months, and watching him interact with other characters, I've gotten to know his mind and can really sink into his headspace quickly. And part of that is because no small amount of acting is reacting, right? That's how the saying goes anyway. And through those reactions, we get character development. Because I play him against other people, I'm learning how Ketherick behaves in light of certain circumstances, how he feels when he's in various situations, and really kind of digging deep into who he is and seeing how he changes and who he becomes. Like, I could talk about him for a long time, just about the layers of nuance and depth to him, and I'm really excited about this. So this transfers into writing, because when I'm creating characters, one of the things that I really spend time thinking about is how they interact with the world and how they feel about things around them, and using those reactions to build nuance into the character and understand their mind better. So at the start of the campaign, Ketherick could not read because he's severely dyslexic. Like I said, he doesn't have a high intelligence, so that affects his ability to learn, and that's mostly because, the way I explain it, he's horrendously dyslexic. So instead of taking session notes in a traditional way, I have decided that his journal is actually his sketchbook, and he draws things that matter to him. So he draws pictures of moments or characters or places and things like that that really mean a lot to him. I actually take out of character session notes in the same journal because obviously I need to not forget details, but he is just drawing things. Through the course of this campaign, some of the other characters have figured out he couldn't read, and they noticed he carried around a journal but wasn't reading, and that confused them, so they asked him about it, and he showed the drawings to people, and he's given drawings as gifts to folks. One of the characters, who he thought kind of didn't like him much because she's very gruff and standoffish and unfriendly in a lot of ways, she actually spent some of their travel time telling him to draw symbols over and over again. And I didn't know what this other player was doing at the time, but she had him just keep drawing these symbols over and over again and kept adding more symbols, and eventually he learned to write his name by writing the shape of the letters, but not associating them with a word. It was a really precious interaction that I cherish, and I would never have thought to have him learn it that way, and it was wonderful. And seeing how he reacted to being taught in that way gave me a little more insight into his mind and how he reacts. Now, all of this is not side nonsense or just an excuse to tell you about my tabletop game character, though it is a little bit, because Sir Ketherick is kind of the best. But to some extent, we're getting back to writing here. Writers, a lot of you have not played Dungeons & Dragons or any tabletop role-playing game before, and I know that. I respect that a lot of people aren't that interested in it, but I think that people, as authors, can really benefit from the experience of actually being their character and really embodying that character. Cassiel, in my series Smoke and Magic, is born of a long-standing character I have played across multiple tabletop campaigns. I have played her in many freeform concepts. She was a paladin in Pathfinder 1st Edition. I played her freeform in a number of places. I played her in a game of Monster of the Week that lasted for about 2 years. Many contexts. I know that character very well, and I've been playing her on and off the table for about a decade. In fact, I think over a decade now. Because of that, I can step into her skin and her psyche really easily. She's just an extension of my own mind and my own thoughts. She's just kind of present there at all times. If you ever have the opportunity to play a tabletop role-playing game, and there are a lot of ways you can get into the hobby if you want to, but using it as a way to test run characters by putting them in different situations that you'd never write them in independently can really give you a lot of depth of understanding of how their minds work. And that can be invaluable information when we're writing. Like I said, seeing Ketherick learn how to write his name as just a collection of symbols rather than as a quote-unquote word, and learning his alphabet would never have been something that entered my head. I never would have come up with it. It never would have shown up in my brain. So, yes, I am unashamedly a tabletop role-playing game fanboy. I really am. Like, my tattoo tells it all. I'm planning on finishing that. I'm going to be getting a half sleeve, a full, bunch of tattoos there about D&D, and it's really important to me. But I also think it has a lot to offer writers, and I really encourage you to explore the hobby a little bit. Bonus points also, if you become a GM or DM, Dungeon Master, Game Master, the person who runs the story at the table, it gives you a really interesting opportunity to test out your stories and see how people react to your characters, to your plots, and your ideas in real time. You can see whether or not they're engaged with this character or find this character interesting. They might find a side character you never expected to be interesting really interesting. It can be a really rewarding experience and teach you a lot about storytelling. Also, if you can think around your players doing unexpected, confusing, and hilarious things in your story, and they will, every time, if you give them that opportunity and you can think around that, you can end up you will overcome any plot hole your book throws at you. You will be able to think your way out of anything. Like, I had players who routed an army with a snowman and a bag of endless rats. If I can handle that, I can handle anything. So, think about joining a TTRPG group if you haven't. Maybe take a look at roleplay in general as an opportunity to explore your characters and maybe tell some other stories. Until next week, I hope you're having a great week. Stay safe in all this heat, and it's just, stay safe, man. It's gross out there.